Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sue Marquesi. I am the Managing Director of Marketing and Communications at AIHA. Today, we are going to be hearing from a few fabulous experts about AIHA's Content Priority Advisory Group. Before I start, I would like to share a few housekeeping tips. Since we're using a virtual platform for this meeting, I think you need to know a couple of things, although a lot of people are used to Zoom these days. Please note the program is being recorded. We're more than happy to share a copy of the recording to all of you after the program ends. We will also be posting it on the AIHA website CPAG landing page, which we will note the very end of this presentation, how you can obtain the slides as well as the recording. We ask all listeners to mute their lines. If participants have any questions or comments that you'd like to bring up or have the presenters address, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. It looks like a little cartoon talk bubble. The chat lines will be monitored by AIHA staff members. And at the very end, we will allow for 5 minutes where I will read the questions and the presenters will answer them for you. Now, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our presenters. Dr. Sylvia Maberti is an exposure scientist at ExxonMobil Biomedical Sciences with more than 15 years of experience in occupational and community health. She's been in academia as well as consulting in the private industry. Within ExxonMobil, Sylvia worked in a variety of projects, mainly focusing on assessment, quantification, and modeling of occupational exposures. She has been a member of AIHA since 1998, when she joined as a student member. She's held several leadership roles on volunteer committees, and now is the chair of the Content Portfolio Advisory Group, CPAG. John Baker is a CIH and has been a member of AIHA since 1975. He has worked in various OEHS roles in industry, government, academia, and consulting. He remains active in the Nano and Advanced Materials Working Group and is a fellow of the AIHA and served as the past chair of CPAG. I would like to now turn over the presentation to Sylvia and John.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. We wanted to share with you basically a little bit of who we are, our background, what the content priorities are, our activities, what's in the horizon, and hopefully get you enticed to get involved and participate in generating some content for the association. So if you want to next. So we wanted to deepen their understanding on how AIHA identifies and prioritizes where to invest its resources, right? Being time, money, staff time, or even the volunteer group's time to create new content that supports the membership. This is what we call our content priorities. So we want to share a little bit more about that and help educate the OHS professionals in relation to these priorities and what we can do to increase their career advancement. If you go to the next one. As a bit of background, I wanted to also share more broadly what the AIHA strategic plan is. And first of all, the mission for the association is to empower those who apply scientific knowledge to protect all workers from occupational hazards, right? So that's the AIHA mission, and the vision is that the world will have a world where all workers are healthy and safe. Next, I wanted to also share the strategic plan, and you can see it has 5-pronged approaches, right? So involving the community, creating awareness around what we do and how we do it, advancing and disseminating the knowledge, integrating the integrity of the OHS practice, and of course, advocacy. And you can see that basically CPAG is right in the middle squared in the advancement and in the dissemination of knowledge. If you go to the next slide. So what do we do and how do we do it, right? So we are engaged throughout all of the process of developing content. And what is content? Content is, and we have a slide later on, and like any PDC, white paper, fact sheets that the membership creates or AIHA creates, and we evaluate new project ideas, and we recommend the content priorities to the board to facilitate their implementation. And also, when you submit some of your requests, you'll see that we will provide some input in how, probably recommendations on how we could you could intertwine these content priorities into your new projects. All right. We also look at the existing content, and we make sure that these products are up to date, and that we are revising it through their life cycle, right? So should we sunset something, or should we update some materials, right? And we will ask the volunteer groups to produce new products, right? If you had a PDC, maybe we'll ask you if you could do a webinar or things like that, right? The other part that I think is very important, and we'll delve a little bit more in that, is the use of an environmental scan, right? So we use that information of looking at the trends that are out there in society, in demographics and technology, and how they're impacting the OHS profession. And we propose the development of new content based on these trends and these challenges. Next. So again, what is a content? And it's what I just mentioned, right? And publications, webinars, PDCs, etc. And the priority, the content priority, are these like larger themes or concepts, right? That would impact how we do our job and what job do we have to do, right? So it really promotes the organizational success of the organization, but also helps foster the successful career of our membership, right? Next. So how do we use these content priorities? We want to help the volunteer groups to enhance their impact by developing or updating their materials or their output, because they are really the subject matter experts, right? We also want to, again, serve our membership by enhancing their knowledge and understanding, and so how they can adapt their work to respond to these global trends and changes, and really help also AIHA resource allocate their resources towards this content, right? So we can better invest our money and our time into developing material that will serve our membership. Next. So really, you can see that we are more of like a shepherd and trying to identify and create awareness around these priorities, but really the subject matter experts are our members and our volunteer groups. So we really wanted to share this information with you to entice you to submit ideas, submit proposals, and develop this new content. And we'll go a little bit through what these priorities are and what we're doing. And later on in the presentation, we'll also share with you how the proposal goes and what the review process is. Next. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there is this concept of the environmental scan. Every 4 to 5 years, the organization consults or hires a consultant. If you didn't know, there is something called a futurist. And they look at these different trends that are coming to our society, that are affecting our society. affecting our demographics, affecting or the technological changes that are happening. Of course, political, geopolitical, there's a lot that is happening out there. And part of the work that they do in conjunction with CPAG is then putting it into context on how is it impacting the OHS profession, or how is impacting the workplace or the workforce, right? And so these are some of like the 10 drivers that we've identified in the past 4 years. So for example, and you can see how even 4 years ago when we identified this, you're living it right now, right? So we have, for example, the rejection of expertise, how it's really, anybody can Google anything, and there is that skepticism of the expertise. And this is really critical when you're trying to implement new changes or implement or propose new programs working on, right? We also see, and all of us are living through this, right? And how predictive analytics is being used right now to either identify needs or opportunities or even threats in the environment. But also you can see both sides of the coin, how this can be used very efficiently and almost invasively, but also the need to understand how to use this well so we get the right answers and the right information to take the right decisions and not bias, for example, the information. One thing that was very interesting, and it's more and more with these capabilities that we have to analyze and mine data, there's a recognition of like decades of data that has been collected and is in your computer and my computer, all of these sensors that we've used and all of these analysis that we've done for many years, and we've only analyzed the part of the information that we were interested in. There's all of this contextual information that has been unused, and now with the capabilities that we have nowadays, it's there's an interesting discovering all of this data and leveraging to do some of that anticipatory intelligence. Or on the other side, with this new sensors and all of this ability to generate data, there is this need to really process this information really quickly and make decisions in real time. Right. Another part that has been really interesting is this personalized artificial intelligence, right? Where we have sensors all around us. Many of us have one on our wrist. Many of us have like everywhere. So how do we use all of this technology and to improve our workplace or our workforce, and what are the risks associated with that? Last but not least, with all of this technology, then the way we're thinking and the way we're interacting is completely different. The way we're learning is completely different. And there is a need really to have a different engagement with the humans that we work with, so we can train them better, we can adapt to new technologies and make their working hours more effective. Next. From the demographics perspective, it's demographics and even socioeconomics. You see that, well, with all of these medical advancements, you have, and because of the societal pressures that we have, workers are staying in the workforce for a lot longer, and they can do that. And what implications does that have with that concept of the healthy worker effect that we have 50 years ago? Do you really have the healthy workforce that you had a while ago? And is that worker representative of the workers that we have today? And how does that impact your work? And how does that impact the way you implement your programs? Or what types of hazards do you have to be aware nowadays that you didn't have to be aware 15 years ago? There's the other aspect of like all of this gig economy, this niche workers that are starting to be more independent and having a specific work that we do for you and for me and for John, but they are not necessarily engaged in a occupational health program, right? They just hop from one to the other to the other. So how do you protect them? How do you engage with these groups of people who are forming and providing services? And with that, then you can also see how you're going to have different groups of workers, the worker that is in your workplace and day in, day out, right? And it's taken care of by your programs, and this other group of people that maybe is hired through 3 or 4 different types of contractors. How do we make sure that we have an equitable distribution of a safe workplace? Do we care about all of our workers the same, right? And again, 4 years ago, we were talking about new forms of work and the workplace changing. A lot of people were starting to do remote. We had a new and I'm like, yeah, processes like advanced materials, advanced processing, advanced manufacturing. And nowadays, you can see after 20 months, everybody working remotely, these new forms of work are taking a completely different meaning. And how does that affect our work as industrial hygienists? How does that affect the workers that we're protecting, their exposures, and how we can implement programs that can help them? And last but not least, of course, that human-machine cooperation that has been amazing in terms of productivity and making the work safer for a lot of workers. Then what types of skills do we have to develop for ourselves so we can train our workers differently? How do we mentor our workers differently? How do we train them so that they can face the new hazards that are in the workplace? And we can also improve that machine cooperation. So next. I think this is the time where I hand it over to John, who's going to introduce the content priorities and describe some of them.
Well, thank you, Sylvia. I will be taking exposure banding, big data and sensor technology and total exposure health. And I think you will then pick it up again with serving the changing workforce and communicating OEHS concepts. So next slide, please. Thank you, Sue. So exposure banding, well, I think in the United States alone, if you look at the Toxic Substances Control Act inventory, there is 85,000 or more chemicals in commercial use in the United States now, but perhaps only 1,000 of them have well-documented, supported numerical occupational exposure limits. So we need to do something to be able to grapple with this issue. Next slide, Sue. Next slide, please. Thank you. So among the vision statements, and in other words, it looks like we advanced 2 slides here, but this is fine. What we're looking for in our vision statements and all of these content priorities is that this is the future state that we had envisioned as CPAG to exist in the next, well, by now it's like 3 years. And so what we would like to see, and these are written in present tense, as you can tell, and trying to make this happen, is AIHA in partnership with NIOSH is educating health and safety professionals on the importance of utilizing occupational exposure banding, or OEB, in their exposure risk assessments. Another vision statement is that industrial hygiene and OEHS and allied professionals, including product stewards, occupational health nurses and doctors, and others, develop and actively use practical guidance for application of OEB in their professional practice. Next statement, please. So what have we recently accomplished as CPAG with the help of volunteer groups in the exposure banding content priority? Well, we've had our first OEB instructional video and supplemental guidance document available on the AIHA.org public web. We posted an open call to grow the OEB working group, and we will soon be announcing 4 people that are going to be joining the working group. What's on the horizon? Developing the second OEB instructional video, similar to the first, but more on the utilization of the NIOSH tool, not just how to use it, but Why would you use it? When should you use it? And providing a supplemental guidance document to support that. And also working with NIOSH, we're drafting and we'll soon distribute a survey. I know you love surveys that explores the hurdles of creating awareness for exposure bans. One final statement on the exposure banding. If you're interested, you might want to take the ACGIH Occupational Exposure Value book, if you happen to have one, and just kind of set a certain number of pages, 10 pages, 20 pages, 30 pages, whatever, and to kind of go through there and see, even in that document, how many chemicals are listed that don't have numerical occupational exposure limits. And I think when you start to look at that, you look at which chemicals there are that don't have limits, you can really appreciate the need for exposure banding, control banding, hazard banding, risk banding. All of these types of approaches are similar. And that's a very important reason for AIHA and to support this effort. Next slide, please. Big data and sensor technology. If you recall from Sylvia's discussion of the future trends in the OEHS industry, a lot of them really talked about these new applications of sensor technologies, allowing for faster collection and much greater amounts. In other words, the 5 V's of big data: volume, velocity, variety of data, veracity of data, and value of data across a broader set of agents. For example, Fitbit data, like Sylvia alluded to, personal location GIS data can then be matched with data combined from sensors such as other wearables, fixed detectors, and drones, and noise and other types of sensors to get a better picture of an individual's actual exposure in the workplace, especially if we combine it with AI. Next slide, please. How does this impact the OHS profession? Well, for example, we don't just have to be people that decide what data to collect, decide how to collect it, and then gather it, and then assess it in a vacuum. We have to now start to think about becoming data analysts ourselves, or how to work with data scientists. How do we communicate what's important to our profession to somebody who's not that familiar with it, but who has great skills in terms of helping us get information out of this data. And so the focus of this content priority is to help our profession leverage cutting-edge technologies for collecting and integrating data to inform risk assessments, management decisions, and stay relevant in the face of transformative change. Next slide, please. Vision statements for this content priority. We would like to see a state where AIHA members are leveraging cutting-edge sensor technologies and data management functions to help with risk management, assessment, and management decisions, that we understand and possess competency in the application of sensor technologies and big data analytics to provide an integrated profile of hazards and exposures. And I think you're going to see how some of the content priorities are adjacent to each other in terms of how we sort of build a stack of capabilities that help each other. AIHA members have software platforms that use standardized data criteria and tools to facilitate the transfer of data and use of data repositories. The CPAG champions are, for this particular content priority, are Taylor Shockey at NIOSH and Felix Bocci at McCormick. Next slide, please. What have we recently accomplished? We've authored the big data and the sensor technology chapters of the updated Industrial Hygiene Performance Metrics publication, which will be coming out in the coming year. Published a synergist article on IH data standardization, and we're continuing to look for more input on that. Published a technical framework and what we used to call bodies of knowledge on big data. And hopefully we'll be working on a guidance document based on the input we're getting on IH data standardization, and planning a 2022 webinar series on big data that'll cover theory and abstract concepts, as well as case studies to discuss big data in a variety of OEHS settings. Next slide, please. Total exposure health. Human health outcomes are being recognized as a result of complex interaction of factors, including exposure to environmental agents, socioeconomic stressors, personal behaviors, and individual genomics. And what I'd like to do at this point is to talk about the exposome, the concept of the exposome. NIOSH has defined the term exposome as the measure of all the exposures of an individual in a lifetime and how those exposures relate to health. An individual's exposure begins before birth and includes insults from environmental and occupational sources. So this automatically brings to mind issues of teratogens and reproductive health, and how this is important to a person's whole life. Next slide, please. How does this impact the OEHS profession? Well, like we said about big data, we're getting more robust collection and integration of exposure to various agents, including socioeconomic stressors and personal behaviors and genomics. I would like to also kind of point your attention to the current September 2021 Synergist. The Synergist, there's an article on exposures to the World Trade Center dust in people's homes or in people's offices or other places, stores, commercial areas where the dust is a little bit unique, as you'll find out in the article. And so it's part of the total exposure that affects the health of people. So the focus of this content priority is to help that we are positioned to be valued participants in this entire discourse. And I think, as you've noticed over the last year and a half, I've been proud, and I'm sure you all have been proud to be industrial hygienists and to be able to help in controlling this pandemic that we've been facing. And hopefully our profession will be recognized as a preeminent expert in anticipation, recognition, evaluation, and control, and confirmation of control of exposures to environmental agents in the workplace, as well as in the home and in the community. Next slide, please. So the vision statements. We expect our profession to understand how occupational and non-occupational exposures combine to affect health outcomes, and are engaging all of our skills in assessing all exposures and their integration for overall exposure. Also, we would like to see the profession as being recognized as exposure science experts that anticipate and recognize, evaluate, and control all exposures that combine to impact human health, and for us to be seen as valued partners in collaborating with other scientific communities on these initiatives, such as the Total Worker Health Initiative, the exposome concept. Total exposure health is part of that. Our champion for this content priority is Anne Laurie from 3M. Next slide, please. What have we recently accomplished in total exposure health? Developed a document identifying exposure-based input opportunities for industrial hygienists. Also on the AIHA public-facing website, there's a total worker health resources repository. If you download these slides later, you'll be able to see over 130 resources that are mentioned on that. And have combined the total worker health and the total exposure health catalyst communities. So now there's one community, an integrated community called Total Exposure Health, Total Worker Health. For the AIHCE 2022, the PDCs and education sessions, we will have more information to support the total worker exposure concept, total exposure health, as well as total worker health, and ongoing collaboration with the advisory group for this content priority. Next slide. And now I'll hand it back to Sylvia.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So the next priority is called serving the changing workforce. As I mentioned earlier, we discussed the fact that the community, our workers are aging, people are increasingly engaging in non-traditional work arrangements, right? So we have gig economies, we have more contractors, a lot of us are working from home, some of us are working for multiple employers at a time. We also have issues with like again, because of this demographics changes and where we have 3 different generations in the workplace, we can also see how the different health concerns, psychological concerns are impacting them. And of course, we have a global economic shift. At the time, it was global economic shift. Now it's the big resign. How is that changing who we serve and how we serve them? Next. So I started already mentioning how does this impact the OHS profession, right? So how do we reach out meaningfully to these workers? How do we serve them? How is the occupational environmental health being addressed now, and how are they managed? So really, we want to focus on creating awareness around these issues in the OHS professionals, and so that they have the tools to understand what is driving these changes, what implications do they have in their specific workplaces, and how can they adapt their programs and respond to keep protecting human health in their workplace and in the community. Next. So some of the vision statements that we have are, again, that first thing is we want to make OHS professionals aware of the importance of these changing exposure profiles, right? All of us have worked with epidemiological studies that have identified exposure and health outcome relationships, right? How do we keep protecting our workers through their lifetime? Now they're jumping and having different workplaces, different work exposures. How do we develop tools to address these issues? We want to also make them aware of the changing workforce, again, from what I was mentioning. So the presence of different diseases. Now we have the issue of mental health popping in. How does this impact the way OHS professional programs and trainings are being implemented in the workplace? Do we have to develop new programs? Do we have to have new engagements? Do we engage more with HR? Do we engage more with the software engineers who are developing all of these machines? How do we engage with all of this? Last but not least, we also need to be aware of the new technologies and industrial processes that are bringing new hazards to our workplace. We have more physical, biological, and chemical hazards than we used to have before. And so we need to be able to adapt the tools that we already have and develop new tools to address these hazards. And you want to talk about it, come talk to me. I'm more than happy to engage you in this priority. Next, please. So what have we done? In the past year or so, we've created a content priority working group to identify really what types of initiatives we want to bring forth and help our community. We've developed a couple of, as a webinar series. One webinar was developed or already broadcasted during spring. It was Bridging Boomers to Zoomers, again, talking about this multi-generational workplace. And in fall, we'll have one more about multicultural workforces, right? How do you address these issues in your workplace? In this past, right after a conference, we distributed a survey around the membership to understand what do people know about this? How do they feel they understand this content priority, and what types of interests do they have to develop content around this? And last but not least, we have a relationship with the AIHA Center for Productive Aging and Work, and also we're working with the Future of Work group. Next. I think this one is one that strikes people odd. It's like, well, is this a new trend? And it's not a new trend. It's really the cornerstone of what we do. We really need to be able to be effective communicators to really raise awareness around the work that we do and be effective in implementing our programs or our initiatives, right? However, I think this is very important nowadays with the way society is changing. We don't have the same trust in the scientists that we had before. So we really need to be able to communicate effectively, to influence as much as we can across the whole organization, across all of the levels of organizations, right? So next. So obviously this is part of what we've been talking, right? So how do we use all of this data analysis? How do we interpret all of this information so that it makes sense for people, as opposed to us handing it to somebody else and then digesting that information, right? So how do we continue supporting the importance of our profession, right? When again, everybody is an expert now and nobody trusts a lot of the work that we do. So we really, nowadays, really want to focus on developing the soft skills for the industrial hygienist. Is really key to listen, to relate and communicate and collaborate effectively, and also being able to translate sometimes difficult concepts and sometimes difficult technical issues to the organization that we serve at any different level. Next. So the vision statements are that really AIHA is a champion for generating awareness and promoting the value of the OHS profession to the U.S. business sectors and to the broader general public, right? So we're not now limited just to the industrial hygienist who works in the industrial setting, but really we want to reach out to the general public, because you can see how the OHS professionals have a role in society. We really want to foster student interest to join the OHS ranks and develop new blood in this career, right? We want to develop practical tools that support the OHS professional in how they communicate their concepts of risk assessment, analysis and management of the risks that have been identified, again, through all of the levels of the company and the communities. We want to include takeaway messages in every educational offering that we have, and allow the industrial hygienist to really make a business case for proposed technical solutions that really are ideal to manage risks and have a positive impact on the bottom line of the organization. Last, AIHA leverages best-in-class offerings to empower OHS professionals with critical soft skills needed to communicate effectively with stakeholders. And the champion for that is Chuck Geraci, and I think we need to update that because Chuck is now happily retired. Next. So this group has been really busy. They hosted a spring seminar or webinar on soft skills and communicating science effectively by using risk perceptions, narrative, and persuasion theory. And I think just like a couple of weeks ago, there was another webinar on IP for IH, so instructional practices for industrial hygienists. They're also developing a PDC for 2022, and I think Jonathan is on the line. And we're exploring new opportunities to expand AIH's Communication and Training Methods Committee for additional educational offerings. Next. So, John?
Thank you, Sylvia.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sylvia. So we do have a number of groups that are working with CPAG, includes some CPAG members as well as members from various volunteer groups or people that are just volunteering on their own, whether they're in a committee or a work group or not. So the Big Data and Assessment Technology Working Group has been very active, looking at different databases that can be used and how to use them and what sort of information are we finding when we apply statistical tools. Similarly with the combined AIHA and NIOSH Big Data Task Force, We're looking at sort of overlapping concepts, but with more NIOSH input. The occupational exposure banding working group is going to be getting more active in the coming year. The serving the changing workforce working group has already been active and is going to be doing a lot of great work this year. And the total exposure health, total worker health advisory group is also looking for people to volunteer. So next slide is, how do I get involved? Well, if you have an idea for a content proposal, it always helps to get input from the profession. And we have we basically have a proposal form for letting CPAG know, here's my ideas, here's who's supporting it, here's what it's going to accomplish, here's how I plan to do it. And then we help kind of look at that and advise, okay, well, there's some content priorities that you may have not thought about, but they could really make your proposal stronger. And so we go into that. The new webpage detailing all the different types of content is available, which I found quite interesting to learn more about the different kinds of content. And in the coming slide, we'll look at those. If you'd like somebody from CPAG to give a presentation on a volunteer group call, a lot of times officers for volunteer groups are kind of looking for, hey, what can I add to my agenda for the next meeting? All of us are happy to call in and field questions or pose questions even to the group. If you're interested in helping with content priority initiatives like those groups I just mentioned, or help create more groups like that, well, then just reach out to the CPAG webpage, which the link is shown here, or reach out to a CPAG member. Next slide, please. Now, last slide, please. Thank you. When we talked about content channels, I mean, to me, that's a very technical term that AIHA staff understands thoroughly, and AIHA members may not. So this was really cool. If they click on the link in the last slide, it tells exactly, here's what a fact sheet means, how it's different from a white paper, what that is, how that's different from a guidance document. A position statement is something that really has to be coming out of the board level of the AIHA. What we used to call bodies of knowledge and now called technical frameworks. What are they and how do they support the other activities or knowledge that we have in our community? What kind of publications are there that people are working on? How do you put a webinar together and get AIHA support for that? How do you make a presentation, AIHCE? How do you get a synergist article idea into Ed Rutkowski and his staff, and how to get that and make it really actually happen? Same thing with the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Health articles or environmental hygiene. So I think that's a really great link. If you do download the slides and you click on that link, I think it'll be very informative. At least it was for me. Next slide, please. Thanks, Sue. These are the CPAG members with their emails. Chuck's current email is up there too, as well. And all of us are interested in hearing from you, willing to spend time with you or with your working groups, with your committees, and try to understand. One thing I need to really emphasize is the board liaison. Justine Parker is our board liaison now. She took over from Dina Siegel, who moved down to a different position. But it's very important in all of these activities to work with your board liaison. That person understands what your working group or your committee is trying to accomplish, is able to add an independent, very well listened to and supported voice to support your proposals. The last thing you want is to put in a proposal and then for your board liaison to not know anything about it. So really work closely with your board liaisons. They want to see you succeed. They want to help. They have a lot of experience in making these things happen. So please remember to do that. And next slide, please. We do want to hear from you. There's an opportunity to provide feedback on this slide as well as the survey. But don't worry, it's only a 3-question survey. And it's a very short survey, but a very important one. And we hope that you will be able to download these slides and and give us some input and share your ideas, because that's what this is all about. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. And here's how you can get a copy of the PowerPoint.
Yeah. And again, I wanted to thank you all for your time and reiterate the fact that really it is our membership, the ones who are experts, and we really want to hear from you, and we want you to develop content for the association. I think it's going to be it's the way we've always operated. We help our membership by developing all of these materials. So thank you again.